One of the things that we're going to need to do quickly if we're going to find reference angles and we're going to use our memorized values is to quickly determine what quadrant something's in and what angle it's coterminal with. So remember, coterminal, and it's right in the language of the question, coterminal, the word co in English means to share. So they share the same terminal side. Think of other co-words in English like coexist, things that live in the same place, cooperative, co-ed. There's probably some co-words that don't work. I'm trying to think of some. Yeah. This is just money.
Sorry for the interruption.
Co-in. Doesn't work. Unless you want to share your money, then feel free to come talk to me after class. I'd be willing to share your money. Yeah. Co-op, which stands for cooperative, which means people sharing the same ownership. So that one works because they operate it together. But you don't actually pronounce that word co-in, so I guess that's probably why. Okay. Oh, I just feel like getting off topic all day today. Okay, maybe I'll give you a spelling contest thing at the end. Okay. Okay, so 4,300. If you had your calculator, if you divided by 360, you'd find out that 4,300 degrees divided by 360 gives you 11.94 repeated. And that means you do 11 full revolutions and then 0.94 of another revolution. Because every time you go 360 degrees, that's one revolution. Okay? I can imagine this like, where could you do 11 revolutions and still, well, you'd probably not survive, but, because I don't think 10-meter diving board, can they do 11 revolutions before they hit the water? How many can they do? Any divers? No divers in here? Okay. Like, how about that ski jump stuff? They spin in the air a bunch of times, but I don't think they can do 11. You could do donuts in a parking lot. Yes, especially right now after this cold, cold weather. It's really slide well, right? Make sure you come to the school early when there's no cars in the parking lot. It's better to do that then. Maybe. You're going to run 11 laps, right? Now, if it ends in 0.94, does that make sense when you're going around that this is halfway around, this is a quarter of the way around, this is 3/4 of the way around? And so 0.94 would end in quadrant 4. Now, to find out what 4,300 is coterminal with, we have to keep subtracting 360 degrees until we get an angle between 0 and 360. Does that make sense? Probably if this was a mental math question, this is what I would do. I wouldn't just subtract 360 once. I'd probably start by subtracting 10 of them because the mental math is pretty easy. Okay, 3,600 away from that leaves me with 700 degrees. So 700 degrees is coterminal with 4,300 degrees. Include my degree signs. And then I could subtract another 360 degrees and go, okay, now I'm between 0 and 360. I know that 340 degrees is in quadrant 4 as well. And that is the first positive coterminal angle with 4,300. So we're often looking for that first positive coterminal angle because that brings us back between 0 and 360 or between 0 and 2 pi. Now in radians, we could do a similar thing, but often radians are a non-calculator question. So if I did this with my calculator, I could take negative 23 pi over 6 and divide it by 2 pi. How would I type that into my calculator? Well, if you do have the fraction button on your calculator, okay, alpha y equals, and you can put fraction buttons, and I want to do negative 23 pi over 6 divided by 2 pi, I'd have another fraction in my numerator, negative 23 pi over 6 in my numerator, divided by 2 pi in my denominator. The nice thing about the fraction button is if you screw up, it does this. Let's see. Oh, I used the wrong negative sign. Have you ever done that? Okay, I use the subtract sign. I need to use the negative sign instead of the subtract sign. Now when I push enter, it tells me negative 1.91. What quadrant is that in? Close. Then 0.91 should make you think quadrant 4, but it's negative. So now, if I was going in the negative direction, negative 1, and now 0.91 more, it's going to end in quadrant 1 because you're going in the negative direction. Now that's only if you had your calculator. But like I said, for radians, generally, you're not allowed your calculator. You have to be able to figure out where 23 pi over 6 is, that it's in quadrant 1, quicker without your calculator. So what we do is we change the coefficient or the number in front of pi to a mixed fraction. So negative 23 over 6 is negative 3 5/6. In other words, negative 23 pi over 6 is equal to negative 3 5/6 times pi. And when thinking in terms of pi, we have to remember that pi is only halfway around the circle. So if you go negative 3 pi, this would be negative 1 pi, this would be negative 2 pi, this would be negative 3 pi. So whenever you have an odd number, you're going to end on the negative x-axis. Whenever you have an even number, you're going to end on the positive x-axis. So if I'm at negative 3 5/6, well, the 5/6, that 5/6 is more than half, so I know that it's going to end in quadrant 1. What are my coordinates for pi over 6 in quadrant 1? The x-coordinate or the y-coordinate going to be a half? The y-coordinate's a half. That means my x-coordinate is root 3 over 2. And so now if I ask you a mental math question, what is cos of negative 23 pi over 6? You know it's root 3 over 2. What is sine of negative 23 pi over 6? You know that it's a half. I mean, we can check our calculator. Sine of negative, oh, wrong negative sign, easy. Negative 23 pi over 6. We just figured that out mental math that it was a half. Comes up on our calculator as 0.5. So if we're able to change it to a mixed fraction, and one of the beautiful things about radians is that if you have a fraction that's in lowest terms, like 23 over 6, can't be reduced any further, you know that that's part of the pi over 6 family. You just have to find out what quadrant it's in, and then you can do all the mental math and figure out sine, cos, and tan quickly. Now, if you wanted to find the first positive coterminal angle with negative 23 pi over 6, well, it's a negative angle, so you're going to have to add 2 pi. Adding 2 pi once, okay? Let's say you want to add 2 pi once. One of the things that you're going to get really good at for adding 2 pi is recognizing when I add fractions, I need a common denominator. 2 pi is the same as what pi over 6? 12. Can you see if you added 12 once, you'd be at negative 11. You'd still have a negative angle. If you added 12 twice, adding 24, then you get pi over 6. So we see that we have the same angle in quadrant 1. It's part of the pi over 6 family. And we can do all the mental math with that as a result.